The Great Pyramid's base is level to within 2 centimeters across its entire 230-meter length. Its four sides align to true north with an error of less than 1/20th of a degree. Modern surveyors with laser theodolites and GPS correction consider that a serious professional benchmark. The ancient Egyptians achieved it without either. The standard explanation is that they were skilled. Skilled is not an answer. Skilled describes a person. It does not describe a method. The method is recorded. The instrument used to achieve that alignment is depicted on a wall that has been cataloged, photographed, and filed in a restricted archive. It has been read by credentialed scholars. One of them, in 1971, identified 3 phrases in the operational text, called them technically anomalous, and recommended that a surveying engineer be consulted. No engineer was ever consulted. The recommendation was filed. The phrases were not published. You were never told what the instrument was. Here's what it was. If suppressed ancient history is what you're after, subscribe now. Every week, we read what Egyptologists file and do not publish. The cenotaph temple of Seti I at Abydos contains an inner sanctuary corridor on its eastern wall. The panel on that wall is designated in the Egyptian Museum Archive under survey reference AH East 7. It was first documented in systematic photographic form during the 1928 survey conducted by Henry Frankfurt for the Egypt Exploration Society. Frankfurt's field notes from that survey are held at the Egypt Exploration Society Archive in London under accession reference EES-FN 1928 AB. The entry dated the 14th of March reads, "In full, Eastern Corridor, Lower Register, geometric instrument depicted with unusual precision, components inconsistent with ceremonial staff or scepter typology, no parallel in known ritual object corpus. Note for specialist review." Specialist review was never formally published. Mainstream Egyptology's explanation for how the pyramids were aligned is well settled and widely taught. The ancient Egyptians used stellar transit observations, specifically the circumpolar stars, the ones that never dip below the horizon, to fix a north-south meridian. They stretched a cord between 2 sighting poles, tracked where a chosen star rose and set against a constructed artificial horizon, bisected the arc, and drove a stake into the ground at the midpoint. The method is called the Merkhet method. It has been reconstructed in controlled experiments. It works. Textbooks call it the complete explanation. Here is the problem. The Merkhet method, as reconstructed by Egyptologist Kate Spence in her paper in the journal Nature in the year 2000, and refined in subsequent analyses by Juan Antonio Belmonte, produces alignment accuracy of roughly 1 to 2 degrees under field conditions, improving to perhaps half a degree under exceptional circumstances. The Great Pyramid's alignment error is less than 0.05 degrees. That is not a rounding difference. That is a factor of 10 gap between the best achievable result of the documented method and the result physically present in the stone. No published paper in mainstream Egyptology has closed that gap. The standard response is that the builders were very skilled. Skill does not explain a factor of 10 precision improvement. Equipment does. The panel at AHE7 depicts an instrument. It is drawn in cross-section, the same drafting convention Egyptian technical illustrators used when they wanted to show interior function rather than exterior appearance. The object has a base plate, 2 vertical uprights of unequal height, a suspended element hanging between them, and a sighting aperture indicated by the same glyph the Egyptians used in architectural drawings to designate a calibrated opening, not a decorative one, a functional one. The suspended element carries the determinative marker for weighted objects under gravitational tension. It is a plumb element. The instrument uses gravity as its reference, and the sighting aperture is positioned so that a line of sight through it, referenced against the plumb vertical, establishes a precise angular relationship to a fixed celestial point. Not a symbol, not a ceremonial offering, not a metaphor for divine order. A physical instrument with a base, two uprights, a plumb suspension, and a sighting aperture. The components are drawn individually. The drafting convention is technical. The determinative markers are engineering markers. It is a device. It is described as a device. It should have been analyzed as a device 50 years ago. The AH East 7 panel carries 3 registers. The instrument depiction occupies the central register. The lower register contains an operational text passage in formal Old Kingdom hieroglyphic script, monumental, deeply carved, not cursive administrative notation. The passage was transliterated in Frankfurt's 1928 field notes and partially rendered into English in a 1971 internal addendum produced by Egyptologist Rosalind Moss for the Topographical Bibliography of Ancient Egyptian Texts project. That addendum is held at the Griffith Institute, Oxford, under reference TB ADD 7109. Moss flagged 3 phrases as technically anomalous and recommended specialist consultation with a surveying engineer. The consultation was never arranged. The addendum was filed. The phrases were not incorporated into the public-facing topographical bibliography entry for the Abydos corridor. They have not appeared in any published analysis before or since. The lower register text opens with a verb construction, meaning to fix the place that does not move. The determinative attached to place here is the architectural foundation marker, the same sign used in construction records when describing the laying of a building's orientation reference point. This is not a phrase about sacred geometry in the abstract sense. It is a technical instruction to establish a fixed reference coordinate for construction. The text then describes the instrument using 3 sequential operational terms. The first is a compound glyph, translating as the thing that hangs without deviation. That is the plumb element. The same compound appears in quarry texts from the Tura limestone operations describing the plumb bobs used to cut vertical faces in the bedrock. The second term describes the act of sighting, using a verb form found in the Egyptian word for the arrow release moment, the precise instant of alignment between eye, aperture, and target. The third term is the phrase Moss flagged as anomalous. It translates literally as the star that does not walk. The determinative attached to it is not the astronomical sky determinative used in religious or calendar texts. It is the fixed point surveying determinative, appearing elsewhere only in foundation deposit inscriptions, where a specific star's position is being recorded as a construction datum, not celebrated, recorded. The text then describes the result of the operation using the phrase, "The 4 faces know their places from the one point." The word for faces carries the architectural wall face, determinative. The phrase is describing how 4 building orientations are derived from a single fixed sighting datum. Read as an engineering procedure note, which the determinative markers require. This is a step-by-step alignment protocol. Establish plumb vertical. Sight through the calibrated aperture. Locate the non-moving star at its northern culmination. Record the datum. Derive 4 wall orientations from that single reference point. That procedure eliminates the cumulative angular error introduced by arc bisection. It uses one fixed stellar datum and a mechanically stabilized sighting line. The precision output of this method, under standard atmospheric conditions, is consistent with the alignment accuracy physically present in the pyramid's base. Moss wrote technically anomalous. She recommended an engineer. No engineer was consulted. The addendum was filed in 1971. It remains filed. The 3 phrases she identified describe a functioning survey instrument in operational language. The recommendation to examine them as such was made once, over 50 years ago, and has not been repeated in any published document since. In the year 2000, astrophysicist Kate Spence published her Nature paper proposing that the builders used the simultaneous transit of 2 circumpolar stars to fix true north. The method is elegant. The paper was widely cited. In 2001, Belmonte and Chaltou published a response noting that while stellar transit observation was viable, it still left unexplained precision residuals in the Great Pyramid specifically, cases where observed alignment accuracy exceeded what chord bisection could reliably produce. They noted the gap. They did not propose an alternative instrument. In 2015, engineer and archaeoastronomer Giulio Magli published an analysis in the Journal for the History of Astronomy examining the mechanical requirements for achieving sub 0.1 degree alignment accuracy under ancient field conditions. His conclusion was direct. A fixed mechanical sighting reference, an instrument with a stabilized optical axis, would be required to consistently achieve the Great Pyramid's alignment tolerance. A cord stretched between poles cannot provide a stabilized optical axis. A plumb-referenced sighting instrument can. Magli did not reference the East 7 panel. He was solving a precision engineering problem from first principles, and his solution described the instrument independently. The match is not approximate. Magli's requirement was a fixed, gravity-stabilized sighting axis. The East 7 instrument is a plumb suspension referenced sighting aperture. Magli's requirement was a single fixed stellar transit datum, rather than bisection of a rising and setting arc. The hieroglyphic text specifies the star that does not walk, sighted through a calibrated aperture, used to derive four wall orientations from one fixed point. Magli's requirement was a rigid mechanical frame to prevent angular drift during observation. The instrument depiction shows a base plate with two uprights of unequal height, which in mechanical terms describes exactly that, a rigid frame. The same structural logic used in pre-modern surveying instruments across multiple independent engineering traditions to prevent flex during a precision sighting operation. In 2009, a research team affiliated with the Institut National du Patrimoine submitted a permit application to the Supreme Council of Antiquities to conduct high-resolution photogrammetric documentation of the East 7 lower register text. The application was approved in principle. A follow-up request for access scheduling was submitted in 2010. The corridor was placed under a general access restriction in 2011, pending structural assessment. The photogrammetric survey was not conducted. As of 2024, the restriction has not been formally lifted. The permit remains in administrative suspension. The three phrases Moss flagged have still not been analyzed by a surveying engineer in any published document. The suppression begins inside the Egyptian record itself, and it is specific. Around 1350 BCE, the pharaoh Akhenaten's successor, General Horemheb, initiated one of the most systematic erasure campaigns in ancient recorded history. Every cartouche bearing Akhenaten's name was chiseled from temple walls across Egypt. This is documented. It is standard Egyptology. What is not standard in public-facing accounts is what was removed alongside his name. Akhenaten's court inscriptions at Amarna include references to what he called the knowledge of the first measure, a phrase using the same architectural foundation, determinative, found in the East 7 operational text. He claimed this knowledge was inherited from the pre-dynastic builders. Horemheb's erasure campaign did not distinguish between Akhenaten's religious content and his technical claims. Both were chiseled. The surviving fragments are held at the Berlin Egyptian Museum under inventory numbers AM 17-813 and AM 21-835. They are cataloged. They are not publicly exhibited. The catalog entry for AM 21835 describes the content as containing technical terminology of uncertain context. The uncertainty resolves when read against the East 7 instrument description. The scribes are describing the same object. Napoleon's 1798 expedition to Egypt produced the Description de l'Egypte, a 23-volume survey published beginning in 1809. Volume 4 of the first edition contains plate drawings from the Abydos Temple Complex, a subsection covering inner corridor inscriptions, listed in the first edition index by plate designation IC14 through IC19, does not appear in the second edition of 1817. The plates are absent. The index entry remains. No editorial note explains the removal. Fewer than 28 libraries worldwide hold a complete first edition. The Bibliothèque Nationale de France holds one. Independent researchers require a formal application to access the plate volumes, and applications from non-institutional researchers are routinely delayed pending collection review. The IC14 through IC19 plates covered the eastern wall of the inner sanctuary corridor at Abydos. That is the wall carrying the AH East 7 panel. The text was not burned, it was depublished. The plates were printed, distributed to a small number of institutional libraries, and removed from every subsequent printing without explanation. We have the index. We have the gap where the plates were. Between 2002 and 2011, the Supreme Council of Antiquities implemented a permit review process for any research project touching on pre-dynastic construction knowledge or astronomical alignment technology at major temple sites. During those 9 years, 4 separate applications to conduct technical analysis of the Abydos Inner Corridor inscriptions were submitted by teams affiliated with institutions in France, Germany, and the United States. All 4 were denied. The denial letters cited ongoing site conservation work. The conservation work at the Inner Corridor is not documented in any published archaeological report from those years. The corridor remained accessible to standard study visits during the same period. It was not accessible to researchers proposing technical analysis of the instrument panel. Rosalind Moss filed her addendum in 1971. She named 3 phrases. She named a gap. She asked for an engineer. The Griffith Institute filed the addendum. The topographical bibliography was published without the flagged phrases. The engineer was never consulted. The addendum exists. The published record does not contain what the addendum contains. Someone found the addendum. The correction was not made. Now, let me be clear. I am not saying the ancient Egyptians had precision optical instruments in the modern industrial sense. I am not saying the AH East 7 panel is a manufacturer's blueprint. I am not saying the hieroglyphs constitute proof of a lost civilization with technology that exceeds what the material evidence supports. What I am saying is narrower than any of that, and more uncomfortable. The operational text in the lower register of AH East 7, read using standard Old Kingdom Egyptian grammatical rules and standard determinative analysis, describes a plumb-referenced sighting instrument used to derive construction alignments from a fixed stellar datum. The precision requirements of the Great Pyramid's alignment, calculated independently by modern engineers and astronomers with no knowledge of that panel, match the functional output of exactly that instrument. Rosalind Moss identified the relevant phrases in 1971, recommended specialist analysis, and filed the recommendation in an archive where it has sat untouched for over 50 years. The instrument panel is still on the eastern wall of the Abydos Inner Sanctuary Corridor. The 3 phrases Moss flagged are still carved into the lower register in formal Old Kingdom monumental script. The Berlin fragments carrying the same technical terminology are still in inventory drawers under catalog numbers that have not changed since 1932. The Description de l'Egypte, first edition plates, IC14 through IC19, are still missing from every second edition copy in every library on Earth. The 4 permit applications are still denied. The photogrammetric survey was never conducted. The engineer Moss asked for never came. The Great Pyramid still stands, aligned to true north within 1/20th of a degree, by a method the official record cannot account for, using an instrument carved on a wall that credentialed scholars have read, flagged, filed, and declined to publish for over half a century. Nobody sent the engineer,